congregation, I'm used to having an offertory taken before the sermon, so I'm not expecting the offertory to reflect your reaction to my sermon.
You're going to be so good. That was what we hoped.
It is very difficult for me to face a holiday that honors only those who died in the military as a way to serve our country. I've committed a significant part of my life volunteering and working in the peace movement, and I believe passionately that engaging in war is a last resort. It is, in fact, an admission that all our other efforts have failed. I share this quote from George Marshall, U.S. Army Chief, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and a Nobel laureate. And he says, "The only way human beings can win a war is to prevent it." Several years ago, a congregant at the Princeton congregation and I collaborated to create a service to expand our sense of Memorial Day to be more inclusive of all who have given their lives for a cause that they are passionate about. We hope today to honor those who gave their lives in war and also those who served and died in other ways on behalf of our country and of humanity. Memorial Day was declared on May 5th, 1868, following the Civil War, and celebrated on May 30th that year. The intent was to honor men who died in armies of both the North and the South. But since it was declared by a Northern general who referred to the Civil War as the late rebellion, it wasn't celebrated by the whole country until after World War I, when it was declared to be in honor of all Americans who died in any war. Reverend David Takahashi Morris wrote a piece on Memorial Day in an issue of Quest. I hope you're familiar with this. It's a publication of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. In our time, Memorial Day sometimes takes the place of a day of remembrance of all those dear to us who have died. In other cultures, the Day of the Dead fills that need. But in our country, besides the parades full of scouts and kids on bicycles and short presentations of arms by representatives of the servicemen and servicewomen, most of us treat Memorial Day as the first day of summer. The David Morris article challenged my view of Memorial Day by asking, can we keep Memorial Day without glorifying war? He writes that we who are opposed to war have difficulty separating out our feelings about those who died from our opinions about war. This certainly describes me. Morris invites us to concentrate on the humanity of the dead, all the dead, including our so-called enemies, all real human beings. He continues, if my contempt for war makes me unable to grieve for the lost lives of the young dead soldiers, then my contempt for war does not arise from my respect for life. I struggle with this challenge. How am I going to live with a passion for peace rooted in respect for life that's open to honoring those who've given their lives with equal passion, but on a different path? On this Memorial Day Sunday, I'd like to honor people who have died in the military, but also in other forms of service to their country and to the larger world. Here are some of my heroes and heroines, famous people who devoted their lived lives in service to values about which they are passionate, to making the world a better place. Many of these people lived in real physical danger and at risk of threat and recrimination. They met and overcame life-threatening challenges in order to provide housing and food, to bring compassion and justice, to increase respect and honor to other human beings, and to support wild and domestic animals, and to the earth within whose nurturing sphere we all lived. They lived with courage. First, Jane Addams, 1860 to 1935. Jane was a founder of the U.S. Settlement House movement and the second woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1889, she and her college friend Ellen Gates Starr co-founded Hull House in Chicago, Illinois, the first settlement house in the United States. At its height, Hull House was visited each week by 2,000 people. The harsh criticism received by Adams both for her outspoken pacifism during World War I and her intense defense of an immigrant's civil rights during a period when anarchism and socialism were greatly feared in the United States. These never stopped her from putting forth a great amount of effort and energy into Hull House, and in addition, she made time to work for international peace. Dorothy Day, 1897 to 1980, was an American journalist, social activist, and devout Catholic convert. She advocated Catholic theory of distributism. She was also considered to be an anarchist and did not hesitate to use the term. In the 1930s, Day worked closely with fellow activist Peter Morin to establish the Catholic Worker Movement, a nonviolent, pacifist movement that continues to combine direct aid for the poor and homeless with nonviolent action on their behalf. Cesar Chavez Estrada, 1927 to 1993. The Mexican-American farm worker, labor leader, and civil rights activist who, with Dolores Huerta, co-founded the National Farm Workers Association, later becoming the United Farm Workers. Supporters say his work led to numerous improvements for union laborers, and his birthday has become Cesar Chavez Day, a state holiday in 8 states, in eight U.S. states. I forgot to look up the date. Does anybody know? Obviously, it's not New Jersey. Dorothy Irene Height, 1912 to 2010. She was an American administrator, educator, and social activist. She was the president of the National Council of Negro Women for 40 years and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1994 and the Congressional Gold Medal in 2004. She was accepted to Barnard, but not allowed to attend because they had already accepted their 2 black students for the year. Barnard eventually, 30 years later, apologized to Height for not admitting her to the university, but some apologies come entirely too late. By the age of 68, Dorothy had reached retirement age, too old to attend Barnard, but still young and restless in her tireless quest for social justice. She advised kings and queens in America, standing next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Eleanor Roosevelt, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Lyndon B. Johnson. She reminded Eisenhower that black kids should be allowed to attend the same schools as whites, and helped President Johnson understand that black women deserve to serve at the highest levels of government. Known as the godmother of the civil rights movement, she never wasted a second on her quest to make the black family stronger. I was intrigued to learn a few years ago of a link of nonviolent resistance that traces back from Martin Luther King to Gandhi to Tolstoy to a Universalist. The head of that chain is Aden Ballou. His work on Christian non-resistance has recently been republished. He was both a Universalist and a Unitarian and founder of the intentional community Hopedale. Tolstoy regarded Aden Ballou as the most important American philosopher, theologian of his time. Gandhi learned to understand Christianity's message of a God as love from Tolstoy. Martin Luther King learned practices of loving nonviolent resistance from Gandhi. We wouldn't even have to have a Memorial Day in remembrance of dead soldiers if the human community had taken to heart the concept of nonviolent resistance based on love. But they're not just historical figures. Some contemporaries whom I admire. Rachel Findley. She created the Nuclear Dialogue Project in Princeton in the 1980s, giving her life to creating bridges between those who wanted peace without war, but saw enemies as those who worked for their road to peace through the military-industrial complex. Peace and military talked respectfully with one another. How about Representative Barbara Lee? She was the only member of Congress who voted against bombing of Afghanistan. Bob Moore, a compatriot of ours, who's guided the Coalition for Peace Action for 35 years, working to reduce nuclear weapons, to promote diplomacy, not war, to slow the handgun proliferation in our homes. Resistors and conscientious objectors who've been persecuted for their refusal to participate in war because their passionate commitment to life prevented them from taking up arms to kill another human being. And countless peace folks who aren't celebrities. Can you name a few right here in your own community? Are the people that you know that have worked for peace? I'm messing up, thanks.
Carol Haag.
Many of you in this room have risked your lives for others. Many of you would do so if a situation arose. So if we have high aspirations to make this world a better place, we want to live our lives courageously and seek to be welcoming and inclusive in all we do. How do we often end up in conflict? We may not be attacking with swords and fixed bayonets or launching drones, but we manage to make challenges for the lives of those around us, family, friends, and even our own congregations. Aging doesn't help. Being myself one of those persons of a certain age, above 65, I know it's possible to get stuck in my own way of thinking, my own way of doing things, or the way activities ought to go. Those who think or act differently from my way become an enemy of sorts. Cell phone texting, body-pierced earbuds filling their heads with loud music, teens come to mind. People whose politics differ from my own. Those who would change the comforting pattern of how I'm used to doing things or how they're done in my community. It is so easy to make them wrong. It is so difficult to reach out across those differences to find common ground. Thursday night at a Coalition for Peace Action rally called Hiroshima and Nagasaki No More, Bob Moore urged President Obama to lead the world in reducing nuclear weapons of mass destruction instead of building more. Another speaker called us take to our hearts another's pain. He said this is the only way to real compassion and making peace in the world. At the ending of the rally, a protester stormed into the circle, decrying all of us as ignorant. At the moment, I could only hide. But upon further thought, I had to ask myself, what deep pain he must be suffering to attack us so. I found this view of the ongoing nature of peacemaking in an article by Reverend Beth Graham, a UU minister. She wrote, as we struggle to understand the wars and unrests, the hate crimes and racial injustices that fill the newspapers, might we wonder this, is the them versus us that leads to hatred, violence, and war that we are now witnessing on all sides, very different from the them versus us that the troubled teenager in Colorado felt as they blasted their way through their school. How about the them versus us that undergirds all racial violence? The them versus us that is inherent in abortion debates. The them versus us at the heart of national civic unrest. Our own community struggles over land use and taxes. Conflicts that rise in this congregation committed to valuing one another. Beth goes on to write, might we use these moments then to resolve to do our part to help bring together the divisions within ourselves and in our lives that hurt and anger us the most? For only when them and us become we, will any of us ever know true happiness. On this Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, let us remember those who have tried to bring peace to our world. Let us recommit ourselves to understanding the differences that put us in conflict with one another. I'd like to close with the challenging words of David Takahashi Morris from his Quest article. He writes, "There, the soldier's death is not the last full measure." Let me do that again. There, the soldier's death is not the last full measure of their devotion. The world of wholeness and peace we build in their memory is. And may our work to build that world be the last full measure of our devotion.